Colonel Beck, Marshal wheeled her duffel quietly through the bustling concourse of the airport, her movements precise, deliberate, and completely controlled. The early morning sun filtered through the massive glass windows, casting long streaks of light across polished floors. Travelers hustled around her, dragging suitcases, managing children, and juggling coffee cups, while the murmur of announcements and rolling wheels created a symphony of travel chaos. Beck, however, was unfazed. Years of navigating hostile environments, crowded bases, and high-stakes missions had trained her to move through chaos like a shadow, observing, calculating, always 2 steps ahead. She approached the gate for her flight to Dallas, a critical journey after completing a classified assignment overseas. In her crisp civilian attire, she could easily have blended in with the crowd, but her posture, her gaze, and the subtle intensity she carried made her impossible to ignore. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who barely glanced at her before nodding toward the line. Beck's sharp eyes caught the flicker of hesitation. Something felt off. The pilot appeared in the gate area moments later, a young man in his late 20s with a tight posture that radiated self-importance. He scanned the passengers with a clinical gaze, stopping abruptly when his eyes fell on Beck. Perhaps it was the confidence she exuded, the way she held herself as if commanding the room. Perhaps it was the faint but unmistakable air of authority that even civilian attire couldn't hide. Whatever it was, it triggered an assumption. She was causing a delay, she was questioning procedure, she was difficult. "Ma'am," the pilot barked, his tone clipped and unnecessarily sharp. "You need to step off the aircraft, now." Beck paused, her hand still resting lightly on her duffel. She turned toward him with a measured calm that immediately contrasted with his urgency. "I'm not a problem," she said, her voice firm but steady. "I'm boarding with all necessary documentation. If there's an issue, I'd like to resolve it properly." The pilot's brow furrowed. "Rules are rules. You're holding up boarding. Step off the plane, ma'am." Beck studied him carefully. His stance was rigid, shoulders squared, eyes scanning her as if trying to size her up. There was no malice in his gaze, only a brash confidence born of inexperience. She knew the type immediately, someone used to being in charge, untested in real authority, quick to assert dominance over anyone unfamiliar. Years of leading SEAL teams had taught her to recognize such behavior in seconds. She inhaled slowly, the faint scent of jet fuel and polished floors filling her senses. Every muscle in her body was alert but relaxed, her mind running a silent assessment. Environment, witnesses, potential escalation, rules, options. She considered her options carefully. She could escalate verbally and risk a public confrontation, or she could assert control quietly, strategically, and without unnecessary aggression. "Sir," she said, her tone even, commanding attention without shouting, "I have all necessary identification and clearance. If you prefer, we can have security verify my credentials, but I will not step off this plane without justification." The pilot hesitated. His confidence wavered for a split second. The gate agents exchanged nervous glances. Passengers nearby had started to notice the tension, some craning their necks to watch the interaction. Beck didn't flinch under the attention. Instead, she allowed herself a faint, controlled smile. This wasn't just about boarding a plane. It was about asserting authority with composure, a skill she had honed over decades of high-pressure operations. Around her, the murmur of the crowd grew louder. Phones began to emerge, passengers subtly recording what was unfolding. Beck's mind registered it all: potential witnesses, public perception, and the subtle power of patience. The pilot, still rigid, took a small step forward. "I said step off," he repeated, sharper this time. Beck tilted her head slightly, evaluating the situation again. Her hand grazed the strap of her duffel, a small, subconscious gesture of readiness rather than aggression. "I am willing to cooperate," she said calmly, "but stepping off without verification is unnecessary and, frankly, inappropriate given my status and responsibilities." Her words, delivered without rancor, had an effect. The pilot's eyes narrowed, but his composure faltered. For the first time, he sensed that this was not a typical passenger confrontation. Beck noticed the flicker of doubt and chose to maintain silence, letting her presence alone communicate authority. Time seemed to stretch. Beck remained perfectly still, her calm aura contrasting with the pilot's growing agitation. The gate agents were clearly conflicted. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with uncertainty. The passengers whispered, speculation spreading. Who is she? Is she military? What's happening? Beck's mind, trained for complex operations, silently ran through the possible outcomes. She could escalate verbally, she could involve security, or she could let the pilot dig his own hole. She opted for strategy over confrontation, patience over aggression. She didn't need to shout, argue, or force compliance. Control, she knew, often came quietly, silently, through presence and calm authority. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time, almost conversational, yet every word carried weight. If you prefer, we can call security and confirm my credentials. I have no desire to cause delays. I only wish to proceed as authorized. The pilot blinked, clearly surprised at her composure. There was a flicker of uncertainty, the first crack in his otherwise rigid confidence. Passengers shifted in their seats, phones in hand, sensing the drama unfolding in real time. Beck's silent authority radiated outward, influencing everyone in the area without her raising her voice or making a scene. She knew the first stage was complete. The pilot had been challenged subtly by someone he underestimated. He hadn't yet realized the magnitude of her experience or her rank. That revelation would come soon, but for now, Beck held the quiet upper hand. She remained calm, collected, and unshakable, an embodiment of the principle that true authority is not taken by force, but earned through presence, patience, and precision. And as the pilot hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, Beck's eyes scanned the crowd briefly, noting every observer, every recording device, every potential variable. The stage was set for the next act in this unexpected confrontation. The battlefield was no longer overseas. It was right here, in a crowded airport gate, and Colonel Marshall was in complete control. The pilot's jaw tightened, and he took a rigid step closer, his gaze flicking between Beck and the boarding pass clutched in his hand. "Listen, ma'am, rules are rules. You're holding up boarding and I have final authority on this aircraft. Step off now," he barked, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge of desperation. His confidence, built over hundreds of uneventful flights, had begun to crack under the unexpected challenge of a passenger who refused to submit. Beck remained perfectly still, her stance calm but deliberate. She studied him carefully, the tilt of his head, the tightness in his shoulders, the micro-expressions that betrayed his frustration. Every movement of his body communicated that he was unused to being questioned, that his authority had always been accepted without resistance. She didn't need to shout. Her presence alone commanded attention. "Sir," she said, her voice even and deliberate, "I am traveling with all proper identification and clearance. I am not here to cause disruption, but I will not leave this plane without justification." A gate agent, a young woman fumbling with her tablet, glanced nervously between Beck and the pilot. Should we call security?" she asked, voice tentative. Beck's eyes flicked to her briefly, silently acknowledging her concern. "Yes," she said calmly, "that would be appropriate." The pilot's face darkened. He didn't want security involved. He wanted control, an unquestioned assertion of his authority over every passenger, especially those who dared to challenge him. But Beck's quiet confidence forced him to pause, reconsider, and recognize that this confrontation was no longer simple. Nearby passengers had begun to notice the escalating tension. Some whispered to each other, curiosity piqued by the unusual standoff. A man in a business suit pulled out his phone and started recording, while a young woman with headphones whispered to her companion, "What's going on? Why is she not moving?" Beck didn't flinch under their attention. She had learned long ago that the eyes of bystanders could be as much a tool as an obstacle. Public perception could work in her favor if handled correctly. "Step off the plane," The pilot barked again, louder this time, attempting to assert dominance. His words echoed through the gate area, drawing more attention. He did not realize that each command he gave, delivered in frustration, only amplified the control Beck quietly held over the situation. She didn't respond with anger, only calm authority, the kind that forces respect without confrontation. "I have stated my position clearly," Beck replied, voice unwavering. "I am a colonel in the United States Navy, a SEAL. I am fully authorized to travel as I am, and I will comply with lawful verification procedures, but not without them. Step-off orders without basis are inappropriate." The pilot froze, momentarily thrown by the mention of military rank. Beck noticed the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This was the precise moment she had been waiting for, the hesitation that comes when someone realizes they might have underestimated a situation. But he quickly masked it with an attempt to regain control. I don't care who you are," he said, stammering slightly. "Rules are rules. You have to step off the plane now." Beck's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. This was predictable. He had never dealt with someone whose authority and composure were backed by experience, skill, and rank. Years of SEAL training had prepared her for far more dangerous confrontations than an airport gate, but every situation required assessment. She knew restraint, timing, and the demonstration of quiet authority were key. Around them, the murmurs of the crowd intensified. Phones were raised, passengers whispering and speculating, some openly watching as the confrontation escalated. Beck's presence drew attention without effort. It was the silent power of discipline in action. People often underestimate authority that is calm and measured. They mistake it for passivity, not realizing it is strength restrained. The gate agent's voice trembled slightly. "Sir, maybe we should verify her credentials." The pilot snapped his head toward her, frustration mounting. "We don't need verification. I am the captain and my word is final." Beck's gaze, steady and unwavering, met his. "Captain, authority is not measured by confidence alone. Compliance is earned, not assumed. If you cannot verify lawful credentials, your order is not sufficient to force a lawful officer off this aircraft." Her words were precise, measured, and delivered without rancor. The pilot blinked, a moment of doubt breaking through his bravado. He was used to unquestioned authority in the confined environment of a cockpit, a place where hierarchy was clear and submission automatic. He was unprepared for someone trained to command and lead, someone who could assess risk, people, and situation with exacting clarity. Beck's calm demeanor, her presence, and her words were dismantling his confidence piece by piece. Passengers whispered louder now. "She's military," one man said. "Look at her posture. She's in control." Another added, "He doesn't know what he's dealing with." Beck's subtle influence over the crowd shifted the social dynamics. She didn't need to raise her voice. The perception of authority had already begun to swing in her favor. The pilot's voice cracked slightly as he gestured toward the plane. "Step off now." Beck inhaled slowly, as if savoring a quiet moment before the storm. She decided to escalate strategically, not with aggression but with clarity. "If you insist on escalation, we can involve airport security immediately. I have all documentation ready for inspection. I will not leave without lawful verification." The pilot hesitated, his previous certainty eroding. The gate agents exchanged uncertain glances, and passengers craned their necks. The balance of power had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Beck had not raised her voice, not displayed anger, yet her authority now dominated the space. Beck's mind cataloged the situation with precision. She knew security would soon arrive, and when they did, her rank and authority would be. The pilot's arrogance and ignorance had created a public lesson in humility. She allowed the tension to build for a brief moment, letting the natural course of recognition unfold, all the while maintaining her unflappable composure. She remained a model of discipline, presence, and strategic patience, the kind that commands attention without confrontation. And as the murmuring crowd recorded the standoff and whispered in speculation, Beck understood that this moment, though seemingly mundane, reflected the same principles that guided her through life-or-death missions: calm, observation, patience, and measured authority. The stage was set for the next phase. Security would arrive, and the pilot would be forced to confront reality. Beck didn't need to threaten, shout, or assert physically. Her authority, earned over years of missions and leadership, was already silently acknowledged by the crowd, by the gate agents, and even by the pilot despite his resistance. The confrontation was far from over, but the first battle, the battle of presence and perception, had already been won. The tension in the gate area was palpable. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, some craning their necks, phones at the ready, silently anticipating what would happen next. Beck remained motionless, composed, her eyes scanning the room with calm precision. Every detail mattered: the pilot's posture, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the shifting gaze of the gate agents. This was no longer merely a boarding dispute. It had become a test of presence, authority, and perception. "I am Colonel Marshall," she said, her voice calm, carrying across the murmuring crowd. "United States Navy SEAL. My travel is fully authorized. If you wish to continue this conversation, we should involve security to verify my credentials." The pilot blinked, momentarily thrown. He had expected resistance, maybe verbal defiance, but not the quiet confidence and unshakable authority of someone who had commanded teams in life-or-death situations. "A SEAL," he stammered, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Yeah, sure, right." Beck's eyes didn't leave his. She recognized the disbelief in them, the instinctive dismissal of her authority based solely on her civilian appearance and gender. Years in the field had prepared her for skepticism, for the initial underestimation of her skills. She had faced worse in hostile environments, men and women who doubted her at first sight, only to learn the hard way. This pilot was no different. Around them, passengers whispered and exchanged glances. "Did she just say SEAL?" one asked quietly. "Is she military?" another added. "He doesn't know what he's dealing with." Phones emerged, recording the escalating situation. Beck made no attempt to hide her composure. She understood the crowd could either work for her or against her. Maintaining calm authority was essential, not for ego, but to ensure the situation stayed under control. The pilot waved his hands impatiently. "Look, I don't care who you are. You can't just—" His words faltered, interrupted by his own hesitation. He was clearly struggling to process her claim, caught between ego, protocol, and the visible authority she exuded. Beck's presence had already begun to dismantle his certainty. Beck's mind ran through the next steps. She could escalate verbally, but doing so would make the confrontation public in a way that risked unnecessary chaos. Instead, she chose measured strategy. "I am willing to have my credentials immediately," she said, her voice unwavering. "We can involve airport security or the proper authorities. I am not asking for preferential treatment. I am asking for lawful recognition of my status. Without verification, your demand for me to leave the plane lacks proper basis." Her words, calm yet firm, carried a subtle authority the pilot could neither ignore nor easily dismiss. He shifted his weight nervously, glancing around as if hoping no one else had noticed. But every passenger was now paying attention. The murmurs grew louder, the tension thickening. Beck noticed the subtle change in perception around her, the subtle nods, the curious stares, the growing sense of recognition that something extraordinary was occurring. The gate agents whispered among themselves, glancing toward the pilot, unsure how to handle the situation. Beck's calm presence dominated the space. She didn't need to shout or threaten. She needed only to demonstrate composure and clarity. That was enough to assert authority. In high-stress environments, presence often spoke louder than words. "Look," the pilot muttered, struggling to regain control, "I have final authority on this aircraft. Rules are rules. You either step off or—" He trailed off, his words losing their impact under Beck's unflinching gaze. Beck tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral but commanding. "Or what, Captain? You cannot lawfully remove a fully authorized officer from a civilian aircraft without verification or cause. You are free to follow protocol, and I am happy to comply with it, but unverified orders cannot be enforced. Step-off demands require lawful authority, which currently is absent. The pilot's face turned slightly red. He had never faced resistance framed in calm logic and undeniable authority. His training and experience assumed compliance, not confrontation with someone who had command experience, tactical awareness, and the patience to leverage both silently. Beck's calm words forced him to, even as pride and ego struggled against the realization that he had underestimated her. A few passengers leaned forward, whispering, "Is she serious? A SEAL? Wow, he's lost. She's in control," without raising her voice. Beck's strategic patience extended beyond the pilot. She had begun influencing perception, ensuring that public opinion and perception aligned subtly with her authority. Her mind, trained for critical thinking and rapid assessment, considered every possibility. Security would arrive shortly. The pilot would be forced to acknowledge the chain of command. She remained composed, ready for the next step. There was no need for aggression. The weight of earned authority was already shifting the dynamics. Finally, the pilot's voice cracked slightly, betraying his internal struggle. All right, we'll call security. Let's verify your credentials," he stammered. Beck nodded subtly, her calmness unwavering. She had waited for this precise moment, the shift from dismissive arrogance to hesitant acknowledgement. Timing, patience, and observation had done what force never could. Beck reached into her duffel and retrieved a small, official identification folder. She handed it to the gate agent, her movements slow, deliberate, and precise. Every eye in the terminal followed her actions. The agent examined the credentials, frowning slightly, flipping through papers, verifying names, ranks, and authorization. Beck's calm gaze never wavered, and the pilot, standing stiffly beside her, could not avoid noticing the weight of her composure. Passengers began to murmur with recognition. "Wow, she's legit," one whispered. "He totally underestimated her." Phones captured the interaction, recording the quiet dominance of a woman whose authority came not from volume or aggression, but from years of experience, impeccable composure, and tactical intelligence. The pilot's earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by uncertainty, embarrassment, and an almost palpable hesitation. Beck allowed him this moment, letting the natural realization of her rank settle in without interference. Leadership, she understood, was as much about timing as it was about action. When security finally arrived, they quickly reviewed her documentation. Beck remained composed, explaining calmly and clearly her travel status, rank, and authorization. The pilot, once so confident, now stood awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. The passengers, now fully aware, whispered excitedly, some even applauding subtly. Beck had turned a potential confrontation into an authority, strategy, and public perception. The pilot took a step back, finally realizing the truth. He had misjudged her. Beck's calm authority, strategic patience, and measured words had done what shouting or aggression never could: establish undeniable control. She had turned a simple boarding dispute into a lesson in respect and composure, witnessed by dozens of bystanders who would remember it long after the flight departed. Beck straightened, her posture perfect, exuding quiet confidence. "Thank you," she said politely to the security officers. "I will cooperate fully as I have always done." She gave the pilot a measured glance, neither gloating nor threatening, only demonstrating the power of earned authority. As the gate agents nodded, the passengers whispered, and security her credentials, Beck knew the next phase of the confrontation, public resolution and boarding, was ready to unfold. She had not only preserved her dignity but commanded respect, all without raising her voice or compromising composure. The pilot's realization was complete. Authority was not granted by title alone, but by presence, strategy, and unwavering calm. The pilot's face flushed with frustration as he tried to reclaim his authority, but the air around him had shifted. The murmuring passengers, now aware that this was no ordinary confrontation, added weight to every word, every gesture. Beck remained calm, her posture unwavering, her gaze steady. She had become the center of attention without ever raising her voice, a subtle but powerful demonstration of authority. The young pilot, once brimming with self-assured confidence, now faced an invisible opponent whose presence alone unsettled him. "Look," the pilot said, his tone cracking under pressure, "I don't care who you are. You either leave now or I'll call security." His attempt at aggression fell flat. Beck's calm gaze met his, and in that instant the pilot realized he had overstepped. This was not a passenger to intimidate or dismiss. "I agree that security is appropriate," Beck said softly, her words precise and measured. "Let us verify credentials and resolve this matter correctly. I am prepared to cooperate fully, as required by law and protocol." The pilot hesitated, unsure if his insistence would make him appear competent or foolish. Around them, passengers whispered, some recording, some simply leaning forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. A few whispered openly, "She's a SEAL, he has no idea." Another murmured, "He can't just boss her around. She's in charge." The tide of public opinion had subtly shifted, all without Beck needing to raise her voice. The gate agents were visibly unsettled. One agent looked at the pilot and said, "Sir, maybe we should verify her credentials before taking further action." The pilot's jaw tightened, his face reddening. He felt his control slipping through his fingers like sand. Every command he issued was being undermined by his own inability to grasp the situation fully. Beck's quiet authority, backed by experience, had rendered his position ineffective. Beck observed the scene carefully. Her years of leadership in high-pressure environments had trained her to notice microexpressions, subtle shifts in body language, and the psychology of confrontation. The pilot's tightening fists, shallow breaths, and darting eyes all told her he was struggling to maintain composure. She decided to allow him this struggle. It would teach him humility without her ever having to raise her voice. "I understand the need for protocol," she continued calmly, "but unverified orders cannot be enforced against someone with lawful authority. I am asking only for verification, nothing more." Her calm demeanor, delivered with subtle intensity, contrasted sharply with the pilot's rising agitation. Each passenger in the vicinity was now aware that this confrontation was not just about boarding a plane. It was a lesson in respect, authority, and composure. Some whispered their admiration. Others watched silently, captivated by the unfolding display of tactical patience and quiet power. A security officer finally arrived, brisk and professional. "What's the situation here?" he asked, scanning the pilot and Beck. The pilot quickly attempted to assert authority, pointing toward Beck. "This passenger refuses to leave the plane. I have given multiple orders." The security officer's gaze shifted to Beck. She remained composed, standing tall, her calm presence radiating authority. "Sir," she said, "I am Colonel Marshall, United States Navy SEAL. My travel is fully authorized. I am happy to provide credentials for verification, as required by protocol." The security officer raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. He gestured for the pilot to step aside, who did so reluctantly, muttering under his breath. Beck produced her official identification, handing it to the officer with deliberate precision. Passengers continued to murmur, phones raised, capturing the moment. Some clapped softly, not wanting to draw undue attention, but their appreciation was evident. The pilot, now pale and visibly embarrassed, tried to maintain some semblance of authority. I just want to make sure everything's in order," he muttered. "That's all." His words lacked conviction, betraying the internal acknowledgement that he had misjudged the situation entirely. Beck's calm, measured authority had turned the confrontation into a public lesson. Her demeanor, composed and deliberate, contrasted sharply with his frustration and arrogance. She had never raised her voice, never gestured aggressively, yet she had achieved complete control over the situation. It was a subtle, powerful demonstration of earned authority. The passengers, now fully invested, whispered among themselves. "She handled that perfectly," one said. "He didn't even realize who he was dealing with." Another commented, "Her presence alone shut him down." The social dynamics had shifted entirely. Public opinion was now on Beck's side, reinforcing her authority and diminishing the pilot's influence. As the security officer her credentials, Beck remained calm, explaining clearly her travel status, rank, and authorization. The pilot, standing stiffly to the side, could not avoid noticing the precision and clarity of her communication. His previous bravado had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty and embarrassment. The shift in power was undeniable. Passengers continued to record and whisper, capturing the subtle drama of a civilian confrontation turned public lesson in leadership. Beck's composure had turned a potential conflict into of authority and presence. She had not needed to escalate physically or verbally. Her experience and patience were enough to command respect. Finally, the security officer confirmed her rank and authorization. Beck's credentials were, leaving no room for doubt. The pilot's face fell, the humiliation evident in his posture and expression. He had underestimated her entirely, mistaking civilian attire for lack of authority. Beck, standing silently, had dismantled his arrogance with strategy, presence, and discipline. She allowed the moment to settle, offering no gloating, no unnecessary words. The passengers, witnesses to her calm dominance, whispered their admiration. Phones captured the unfolding lesson, destined to be shared and remembered. Beck's quiet authority had turned a boarding dispute into a teaching moment for the pilot, the gate agents, and the surrounding travelers. Beck's mind cataloged the scene, assessing outcomes, public perception, and potential follow-up. She understood the subtle power of patience, timing, and silent authority. The confrontation had been resolved without aggression, yet its impact was profound. Leadership, she reflected, was as much about how one conducted oneself in everyday interactions as it was about combat or missions. The pilot, now subdued, glanced at her briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement passing across his features. Beck met his gaze calmly, conveying understanding without condescension. She had demonstrated the power of disciplined authority, and he knew it. The passengers, witnessing every detail, absorbed the lesson silently. Beck's presence, experience, and composure had turned the tide entirely. With her credentials and the pilot's resistance neutralized, Beck prepared to board the aircraft. She remained composed, offering polite nods to security and gate agents. The murmuring passengers reflected on what they had just witnessed, a demonstration of patience, authority, and presence that required no shouting, no aggression, and no theatrics, only clarity, confidence, and calm mastery. The first stage of the confrontation was complete. Beck had asserted control, maintained composure, and shifted public perception entirely in her favor. The pilot's earlier arrogance had been replaced by humility and recognition. The boarding dispute, initially a simple procedural conflict, had transformed into a powerful lesson in leadership, authority, and respect, witnessed by all present. And as Beck prepared to step onto the aircraft, she allowed herself a small, satisfied breath. The battle of patience and perception had been won. The next phase, resolving the final details and asserting her lawful position fully, was ready to unfold. The tension had not yet fully dissipated, but Beck, calm and composed, was prepared for whatever came next. The moment the security officer confirmed Colonel Marshall's credentials, the air in the gate area changed instantly. Passengers leaned forward, whispering among themselves, some audibly exclaiming, "She's actually a SEAL. And no way, he has no idea who he's dealing with." The pilot, who had been rigid and defensive just moments ago, now stood pale, shoulders stiff, a subtle tremor betraying his embarrassment. He had been confronted with someone whose authority was not granted by his own assumption, but earned through years of disciplined service, and the realization hit him with full weight. Beck remained composed, her posture impeccable. She did not gloat, she did not snarl. She simply allowed the truth of her rank and experience to dominate the space. Every passenger in the terminal could see it, the quiet, undeniable authority of a woman who had commanded SEAL teams in life-or-death situations. Her presence was calm yet commanding, an invisible weight that even the pilot could not ignore. The gate agents now looked to Beck for direction, caught between their obligation to enforce airline policy and the clear authority of a highly decorated officer. Beck spoke in a tone that was firm, clear, and respectful. "Thank you for verifying my credentials. I will proceed to board immediately. I appreciate your cooperation and professionalism." Her words, delivered without aggression, carried an authority that left no room for argument. The pilot's mouth opened, then closed as if searching for words. He had expected compliance, confrontation, perhaps some polite resistance, but nothing like this. His previous attempts at asserting control had crumbled under the weight of Beck's calm dominance. For the first time, he truly understood the gravity of the mistake he had made, and the embarrassment was evident in the way he shifted his stance, his eyes darting toward the floor. "Sir," Beck added softly, her gaze meeting his directly, "authority is earned through knowledge, discipline, and respect, not merely assumed. I hope this serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that every individual here is deserving of proper verification and consideration." Her words were quiet, yet they carried the weight of experience, leaving the pilot to process the subtle but undeniable reprimand. Passengers whispered and exchanged glances, some clearly impressed. "She didn't even yell," one said under their breath, "and he's completely humbled." Phones continued to record, capturing the moment. Beck's ability to command respect without aggression, without theatrics, was remarkable, a silent testament to her years of training, her strategic patience, and her leadership under pressure. The pilot, now visibly deflated, muttered something about procedure, though his words lacked conviction. His authority, once absolute in his own mind, had been quietly dismantled. Beck had turned what could have been an awkward confrontation into a public demonstration of disciplined power and earned respect. She remained calm, polite, and unshakable, a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. Beck moved forward, retrieving her carry-on and checking her boarding pass once more. Each step was deliberate, calculated to maintain her composure while subtly reinforcing her authority. Security officers flanked her as she moved toward the aircraft, giving her space and ensuring a smooth path. Passengers watched in awe, witnessing a rare display of confidence and command in a civilian setting. As she approached the aircraft, the pilot attempted to offer a nervous apology. Colonel, I apologize for the confusion," he stammered, avoiding direct eye contact. Beck paused, considering his words carefully. She could have responded with sarcasm or rebuke, but her discipline dictated otherwise. Leadership, she knew, often required grace as well as authority. "Thank you," she said calmly, her voice steady and firm. "I accept your apology. Let this serve as a lesson in diligence, humility, and the importance of verification." Her words were measured, teaching the lesson without escalating conflict. The pilot nodded quickly, too aware of his own embarrassment to respond further. Passengers continued to murmur, some applauding softly, others recording snippets of the encounter. Beck's strategic presence had turned the situation into an unspoken lesson for all who witnessed it. Discipline, patience, and earned authority had triumphed over arrogance, impatience, and assumption. She had asserted control not through force, but through the quiet power of experience, composure, and impeccable timing. Gate agents now moved aside, allowing Beck to board without further obstruction. The pilot, still processing the events, remained in the background, subdued and humbled. He had confronted authority based on assumption, and he had lost. Beck, silent and poised, had demonstrated the fundamental principle of leadership, that respect and authority are earned, not assumed. As Beck stepped onto the aircraft, she maintained her calm, observing the pilot briefly. Her eyes conveyed no malice, only measured acknowledgement. He had learned a lesson, though perhaps not fully realized until later. Authority without knowledge or respect is fragile, while true authority, earned through discipline, experience, and composure, is unshakable. Once on board, Beck moved down the aisle with the same deliberate grace she exhibited in every aspect of her life. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation whispered quietly, some exchanging smiles of admiration. They had observed a real-life demonstration of leadership and control, subtle yet undeniably powerful. Beck had transformed what could have been a chaotic encounter into a moment of order, respect, and instruction, witnessed by all present. Beck reflected briefly as she settled into her seat. This encounter, though mundane compared to the battles she had faced overseas, had required the same core principles: observation, patience, strategy, and composure. Leadership, she knew, was not limited to combat zones or high-stakes operations. It existed in every interaction where judgment, authority, and respect intersected. The pilot's earlier arrogance had dissolved, replaced by humility and recognition. He now understood, fully and uncomfortably, the consequences of underestimating someone based on appearances or assumptions. Beck's calm authority, earned through years of service and experience, had dominated without confrontation, teaching a lesson in dignity and respect. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Beck remained composed, reflecting on the subtle victories of the day. The battle of perception and presence had been won. She had maintained control, upheld her authority, and turned a potential conflict into a public demonstration of discipline and respect. The passengers had witnessed something rare, in leadership without force, intimidation, or theatrics. And as the plane lifted into the sky, Beck reclined slightly, allowing herself a small, satisfied breath. The conflict was resolved, the lesson imparted, and the quiet power of earned authority had prevailed. She had turned an ordinary airport encounter into a testament to the principles that guided her life: discipline, patience, composure, and the subtle, undeniable weight of true leadership. Plane doors closed behind Colonel Beck Marshall, the low hum of the engines rising as passengers settled into their seats. Yet the tension from the gate lingered in the air. Beck remained calm, her posture impeccable, her presence radiating quiet authority. Around her, passengers whispered, some still replaying the confrontation in their minds and phones. The young pilot, now seated in the cockpit, stole glances at the monitors, his expression a mixture of disbelief, embarrassment, and begrudging respect. He had just faced someone whose authority was undeniable, and the realization left him shaken. Security had Beck's credentials, confirming her status as a U.S. Navy SEAL colonel. The weight of that recognition rippled throughout the terminal and now, more subtly, into the cockpit. Beck's rank wasn't just ceremonial. It represented decades of experience, discipline, and leadership in environments far more dangerous than a crowded airport gate. The pilot, once brimming with unearned confidence, now sat quietly, replaying his errors in his mind. Every command he had barked, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of authority had crumbled under her calm, strategic dominance. Back in the cabin, passengers exchanged whispers, a subtle mix of admiration and astonishment. "Did you see her?" one woman asked quietly. "She didn't yell, didn't argue, and he completely lost it." Another added, "She's a SEAL. You can see it in her posture and how she commands attention." Phones continued to capture snippets of the confrontation, destined to spread online as an unexpected lesson in leadership, composure, and earned authority. Beck, sitting quietly in her seat, allowed herself a faint, satisfied breath. She had won the first battle, control through presence, without aggression or escalation. The pilot's mind raced as he recalled the event step by step. He had assumed that loud commands, strict adherence to airline procedure, and the projection of confidence would suffice. He had assumed that Beck was just another passenger, another challenge to overcome. But she had demonstrated something entirely different: control without aggression, authority without intimidation. She had turned the encounter into a public lesson, leaving him humbled, embarrassed, and acutely aware of his own arrogance. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Beck reflected on the subtle but powerful dynamics at play. Leadership, she knew, existed not only on battlefields or in combat zones, but in every environment where decisions, authority, and respect intersected. The ability to command presence, to assert authority without confrontation, and to teach lessons through composure and strategy was as vital as any tactical maneuver she had executed in the field. The pilot had learned this lesson firsthand. In the cockpit, the pilot finally spoke to the co-pilot, his voice low and uncertain. Did you see that?" he muttered. "She's a SEAL, and I totally misjudged her." The co-pilot nodded quietly, understanding the depth of his miscalculation. They had both witnessed the quiet dominance of someone trained to lead, someone whose authority was not assumed but earned. The young pilot's embarrassment deepened as he realized how narrowly the situation had avoided escalating into chaos. Had Beck chosen a different approach, she could have forced a confrontation, but instead, she had relied entirely on composure, credibility, and patience. Back in the cabin, Beck allowed herself to observe her fellow passengers without distraction. Faces that had been tense moments earlier were now relaxed, some smiling quietly. Children, oblivious to the full details, sensed only the calm aura Beck projected. Her actions had influenced the environment without force or intimidation, demonstrating that authority is not always a matter of command. It is often a matter of perception, patience, and the invisible weight of experience. The pilot, still shaken, leaned back in his seat, reflecting on his mistakes. He realized that his authority, assumed and unchallenged in the cockpit, was fragile in unfamiliar circumstances. Beck's calm assertion had revealed the limits of his confidence, exposing him to humility he had rarely experienced. He understood, perhaps too late, that authority is more than rank, more than verbal commands. It is composure, credibility, and the respect earned over time. Meanwhile, Beck reviewed the encounter in her mind, analyzing the pilot's reactions, the gate agent's hesitation, and the passenger's growing awareness. Every detail mattered. She had maintained patience under pressure, allowing the situation to unfold strategically. She had allowed the pilot to reveal his own weaknesses without direct confrontation. She had turned what could have been an uncomfortable conflict into a demonstration of respect, composure, and earned authority. The revelation had not come from intimidation or force, but from the silent command of her presence. The passengers, sensing the calm finality of Beck's authority, continued to whisper. "She's incredible," one woman said. "I've never seen someone handle a situation like that so quietly but effectively." Another passenger added, "He completely underestimated her, and she didn't even have to raise her voice." The lesson was visible to all. Authority could be demonstrated without aggression, control without conflict, and leadership without confrontation. In the cockpit, the pilot's internal reflection was deepening. He realized he had underestimated Beck not just because of her appearance, but because he had never confronted someone with such quiet, unwavering authority. His earlier arrogance had blinded him, but the experience would leave a lasting impression. Beck's calm, composed, strategic presence had revealed a level of mastery he could not challenge, and he understood that his previous assumptions were entirely flawed. Beck, seated calmly, allowed the silence to carry weight. She did not need to explain, justify, or boast. The revelation had already occurred. Her credentials by security, her calm composure, and the passenger's attention had all made her authority undeniable. The pilot had learned the lesson through observation, reflection, and the subtle demonstration of presence. No words, no yelling, no aggression, only earned authority manifested through discipline and experience. As the plane ascended into the sky, Beck reflected on the subtle victories that often go unnoticed. While this was not a battlefield, it had required the same skills she had honed through years of military service: patience, observation, strategic presence, and the ability to assert authority without force. The pilot's realization, the passenger's recognition, and the overall resolution had demonstrated that true leadership exists in every environment, from the battlefield to a crowded airport terminal. By the time the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the pilot had fully internalized the reality. He had underestimated Colonel Marshall. The embarrassment remained, but with it came respect, an acknowledgement that authority, when earned and exercised with discipline, is far more powerful than assumed control. Beck's silent dominance had transformed a simple boarding conflict into a in leadership and influence. The passengers, now relaxed, quietly acknowledged the impact of the encounter. Phones continued to buzz softly, capturing snippets of Beck's calm dominance, destined to be shared and admired. Beck herself leaned back, allowing a brief, controlled smile. The revelation had been complete, the lesson imparted, and her authority fully recognized, not just by security, not just by the pilot, but by all who had witnessed the unfolding events. The final passengers filed aboard the aircraft, but all attention remained subtly focused on Colonel Beck Marshall. She moved with deliberate grace down the aisle, her posture precise, her movements calm yet purposeful. Even the cabin crew felt the weight of her presence, a quiet authority that radiated without needing to dominate verbally. Every eye in the plane, whether filled with curiosity, admiration, or relief, could not escape the subtle command she wielded through presence alone. The pilot, still in the cockpit, stole another glance at the cabin monitors, noting the hushed attention of the passengers and the professional yet commanding demeanor Beck exhibited. His pride had been thoroughly challenged, and his earlier arrogance dissolved under the weight of her calm authority. He now understood, in ways that mere words could not convey, the difference between assumed control and earned leadership. His confidence was tempered by humility, a rare and uncomfortable sensation. Beck reached her assigned seat, a quiet corner near the rear of the aircraft. She stowed her carry-on with precise movements, ensuring nothing distracted from her calm and composed aura. A few passengers offered polite nods, others whispered quietly, still processing the events they had just witnessed. Children sensed the calm energy in the cabin, the subtle but undeniable authority Beck carried, and even the cabin crew moved with heightened awareness around her, careful not to disrupt the equilibrium she had established. From her vantage point, Beck observed the pilot preparing for takeoff. His movements were careful now, methodical, a stark contrast to the brash confidence he had exhibited earlier. He had learned an invaluable lesson. Authority cannot simply be assumed, nor can it be asserted through volume or impatience. True authority, as Beck had demonstrated, came from composure, earned respect, and the ability to command presence without unnecessary conflict. Passengers whispered among themselves, replaying the gate confrontation in their minds and on their phones. "Did you see how calm she was?" one passenger asked quietly. "He completely fell apart." Another added, "She didn't have to yell or argue, she just commanded attention. Incredible." Beck, seated quietly, allowed the passengers to process the encounter without interjecting. Her authority did not require acknowledgement, it was self-evident. The cabin crew, while trained to maintain order, subtly adjusted their behavior. They recognized that Beck's presence set a tone for the flight, calm, disciplined, and authoritative. Instructions and communications flowed smoothly, passengers responded promptly, and a sense of order settled into the cabin. The pilot, observing this, finally allowed a small, private exhale, acknowledging internally that his initial assumptions had been flawed. Beck's mind, trained to anticipate and assess, noted every reaction in the cabin, subtle glances of respect, whispered admiration, and even the muted embarrassment of those who had previously misjudged her authority. Each detail was catalogued, reinforcing the principle she had applied repeatedly throughout her career. Leadership is as much about perception, patience, and presence as it is about action. The passenger's recognition, though unspoken, was another testament to the effectiveness of her approach. The pilot, now fully in his seat, executed his pre-flight checks with meticulous precision. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and observant. He understood that the silent lesson Beck had imparted extended beyond the immediate confrontation. It was a demonstration of leadership under pressure, a subtle but powerful reminder that true authority is earned, not assumed. He had been humbled, and the lesson would remain with him far longer than any reprimand could have imposed. Beck settled into her seat, adjusting her uniform with careful attention, her demeanor calm and collected. Passengers continued to whisper quietly, some recording small snippets, others merely observing. Her presence had shifted the social dynamics entirely, creating an environment of respect, order, and attentive observation. Even the flight attendants, accustomed to maintaining authority in a confined space, noted the subtle shift in the cabin's energy, an energy controlled entirely by Beck's composed presence. As the engines roared to life, Beck reflected on the encounter. The boarding conflict, initially a minor procedural issue, had transformed into a public demonstration of authority, composure, and strategic presence. She had asserted control without aggression, teaching a silent but profound lesson in leadership. The pilot had been humbled, the passengers impressed, and the cabin crew subtly influenced to maintain heightened professionalism. All of this had been achieved without confrontation, only through the quiet command of presence. The plane lifted smoothly into the sky, and Beck allowed herself a moment to observe the passengers' reactions. Faces were relaxed now, some smiling discreetly, others whispering quietly to companions. The tension from the gate had dissipated, replaced by a subtle sense of order and respect. Beck had demonstrated that leadership could be exercised without overt displays of dominance, that authority earned through discipline, experience, and composure commanded attention more effectively than any shouted order ever could. The pilot, observing from the cockpit, acknowledged the unspoken lesson one last time. His posture, once rigid with misplaced confidence, now reflected cautious humility. He understood that the brief encounter at the gate had revealed the limitations of assumed authority and the importance of recognizing earned leadership. Beck had illustrated that leadership is not about titles or position alone. It is about presence, patience, and the ability to influence without aggression. Passengers, still whispering softly, now settled into the rhythm of the flight. Many replayed the gate confrontation in their minds, appreciating the subtle mastery Beck had demonstrated. A few discreetly sent short videos to friends, marveling at her composure and the pilot's humbled response. Beck, noticing the quiet attention without distraction, allowed herself a faint, controlled smile. The silent acknowledgement of her authority was enough. She needed no applause, no external validation. The cabin atmosphere had transformed entirely. Where confusion and tension had once dominated, calm and respect now prevailed. Beck's strategic patience and measured authority had shifted not only the pilot's understanding, but also the passengers' perception of leadership, authority, and composure. She had demonstrated that true authority is persuasive, understated, and compelling, recognized instinctively rather than enforced through volume or aggression. As the plane cruised at altitude, Beck leaned back slightly, reflecting on the events. Every movement, every word, every pause at the gate had been a deliberate exercise in strategy, observation, and patience. The pilot's earlier arrogance had been tempered, passengers had learned the subtle weight of presence, and Beck herself had reinforced the principles she lived by: composure, strategic patience, and authority earned through experience. By the time the plane approached its destination, the pilot had fully internalized the lesson. His confidence had been tempered, his understanding of authority reshaped, and his appreciation for earned respect. Beck, silent and composed, had not only completed the flight unchallenged but had also left a lasting impression on all who witnessed the encounter. The plane leveled off, cruising smoothly at altitude, yet the echoes of the gate confrontation lingered in the cabin. Colonel Beck, Marshall, remained calm in her seat, her eyes scanning the interior of the plane with the same disciplined attention she had honed over decades of service. Passengers whispered quietly among themselves, replaying the events in their minds. Many had recorded snippets on their phones, eager to share the story of a woman whose quiet authority had transformed an ordinary airport encounter into a lesson in leadership, respect, and composure. The pilot, seated in the cockpit, continued to reflect on his actions, replaying the confrontation step by step. Every command he had issued, every attempt at asserting authority, had been dismantled not by aggression, but by Beck's calm, strategic presence. He had been humbled in ways he had never anticipated. For the first time in his career, he truly understood that authority is not granted by position alone. It is earned through experience, composure, and the ability to command respect without coercion. Beck, observing the cabin quietly, noticed the subtle changes in behavior around her. Passengers were relaxed, the earlier tension dissolved, replaced by a sense of order and quiet admiration. Cabin crew members moved efficiently but with heightened awareness, respecting the unspoken command Beck exerted through her presence. Children, sensing the calm energy, settled quietly, and adults whispered discreetly, still processing the subtle display of discipline and authority they had witnessed. She reflected internally on the events at the gate. What began as a routine boarding process had escalated unexpectedly, and her response had required the same principles she applied in far more dangerous environments: patience, observation, strategic decision-making, and composure under pressure. Beck's authority had been demonstrated without confrontation, her leadership recognized without theatrics, and the pilot's arrogance had been tempered by humility. Passengers continued to whisper, some replaying videos on their phones, others discussing the situation quietly. "She handled that so effortlessly," one remarked. "He didn't even realize who he was dealing with." Another added, "She didn't have to shout or force anything. The way she carried herself, it's like everyone just respected her instantly." The cabin had become a quiet classroom in the power of presence, observation, and strategic authority. The pilot, now fully introspective, realized the depth of his mistake. He had assumed his position granted him unquestionable control, forgetting that respect must be earned, not demanded. Beck's calm authority, her measured words, and her strategic patience had exposed the fragility of his assumptions. He understood that leadership requires more than titles or position. It demands presence, credibility, and the capacity to inspire trust and compliance through earned respect. Beck allowed herself a subtle, controlled smile. The incident had been resolved without escalation, without aggression, and without compromising her values. The pilot had been humbled, passengers had observed in quiet leadership, and the cabin environment had remained under control. She reflected on the principles that guided her life: discipline, patience, observation, and the subtle assertion of authority through composure and earned respect. The remainder of the flight passed smoothly. Beck remained aware of the cabin's dynamics, offering quiet reassurance to those who had witnessed the gate confrontation. Passengers occasionally glanced at her, recognizing the presence of someone extraordinary yet grounded, someone who had demonstrated the power of leadership without dominance. The pilot, observing from the cockpit, executed his duties with renewed humility, silently acknowledging the lessons learned from the encounter. As the plane descended toward its destination, Beck prepared for landing with the same disciplined attention she had applied throughout the flight. Her focus remained sharp, her presence steady, ensuring that every passenger felt secure and that the cabin environment remained calm and orderly. The pilot, now fully humbled and aware of his earlier mistakes, executed the landing with precision and care, influenced subtly by Beck's composed authority. Once the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, passengers disembarked quietly, some casting glances of admiration toward Beck as she rose and gathered her belongings. Cabin crew offered polite nods of acknowledgement, recognizing the subtle influence her presence had exerted throughout the flight. The pilot, now outside the cockpit, watched briefly, understanding fully that this encounter had left a lasting impression, both on him and on those who had witnessed it. Beck walked down the jet bridge with calm determination. She had completed her journey not only physically, but also symbolically. The confrontation had been resolved, authority asserted, and lessons imparted without conflict or aggression. She understood that true leadership often manifests in subtle ways, influencing perception, behavior, and understanding through the careful balance of presence, patience, and strategic action. Passengers and crew alike carried the memory of the encounter forward. Conversations whispered in departure lounges and recorded snippets shared online would immortalize the moment. a demonstration of earned authority, disciplined leadership, and composure under scrutiny. Beck's actions had transformed an ordinary day at the airport into a lesson in respect, humility, and the power of calm presence. The pilot, reflecting privately, acknowledged the profound impact of the experience. He had misjudged Beck initially, assuming appearance and circumstance were indicators of authority. He had learned that true authority is grounded in experience, composure, and the ability to command respect through earned credibility rather than assumptions. The lesson was humbling, but it would remain ingrained in him for the rest of his career. As Beck exited the aircraft, she moved with her characteristic precision, nodding the subtle acknowledgement of passengers and crew alike. Her journey, though momentarily disrupted by the boarding conflict, had been completed with grace, discipline, and authority fully recognized. The pilot's lesson in humility, the passengers' newfound appreciation for quiet leadership, and the crew's heightened awareness reflected the far-reaching impact of a single person exercising earned authority with patience and composure. In the quiet moments that followed, Beck reflected internally on the broader significance of the day. Leadership is not only about commanding in extreme circumstances, it is also about subtle influence, perception management, and the disciplined assertion of authority in everyday interactions. She had demonstrated that true power lies not in volume or intimidation, but in the quiet confidence of experience, presence, and strategic patience. The airport terminal buzzed with activity around her, but Beck moved through it with calm assurance. The pilot, still processing his experience, avoided direct interaction, carrying with him the memory of humility, reflection, and a deep understanding of earned respect. Passengers who had witnessed the events carried away a story they would retell, a woman who leadership without theatrics, authority without aggression, and composure without compromise. As Beck exited into the terminal, she allowed herself a final, quiet breath of satisfaction. The boarding conflict, though brief and unexpected, had become a demonstration of timeless principles: patience, discipline, presence, and the subtle but undeniable weight of earned authority. The pilot had learned his lesson, passengers had been captivated, and the cabin crew had been subtly guided toward a more respectful and attentive approach. The story of Colonel Marshall Seal would not only live on in the memories of those who witnessed it that day, but would serve as a lasting reminder of the power of quiet authority, strategic patience, and the profound impact of disciplined leadership exercised with calm precision. Through composure, observation, and respect for procedure, she had turned a potential conflict into a lesson in dignity, authority, and influence. And with that, Beck moved confidently toward her next destination, leaving behind a trail of respect, reflection, and a story that passengers, crew, and even the humbled pilot would remember for a lifetime.